Greetings and welcome back to the Sleepkeeper's Library. I am the Wanderer, keeper of the paths not taken, and the worlds that might have been. In this timeless library between waking and sleeping, three of us tend the endless shelves. The historian preserves the memory of skilled hands and forgotten crafts, his archives holding the voices of clockmakers who captured time in brass and jewels, craftsmen whose patience shaped beauty from raw materials. The myth keeper guards the stories that refuse to be forgotten, her collection holding the trickster tales and resistance myths, the songs that survived suppression, the oral traditions that shaped human consciousness. But I walk through histories that never were, collecting the great what-ifs, the moments when time could have turned differently. Most often, I find myself drawn to tragedies that were avoided, disasters that never came to pass, the ship that didn't sink, the city that survived the volcano, the timelines where humanity was spared its worst moments. But tonight, as we approach a day when many pause to honor those who served in war, I've chosen a different sort of alternate path. Not a tragedy avoided, but a triumph that never was. Or rather, a small triumph that in our timeline was crushed before it could grow into something larger. A moment when ordinary soldiers, weary and cold and far from home, chose humanity over orders. And in the timeline I'm about to show you, that choice changed everything. December 1914. The Western Front. The war that was supposed to be over by Christmas has settled into something no one anticipated. Miles of trenches, barbed wire, mud, and death. Millions of men facing each other across a strip of devastated earth they call no man's land. In our timeline, this war continued for 4 more years, consuming a generation, reshaping Europe, setting the stage for an even more terrible conflict 2 decades later. But in the timeline I'm about to walk you through, something different happened on Christmas Eve 1914. Something that started the same way it did in our history, with singing, with a spontaneous truce, with enemy soldiers meeting in no man's land to shake hands and share cigarettes and play football. That part happened in both timelines. What happened next? That's where the paths diverged. Come with me to a trench near Ypres, Belgium. Meet Private Henry Webb, a clerk from Manchester who joined up in August with enthusiasm that's long since frozen in the December cold. He's 23 years old. He's been in France for 3 months. He's already seen more death than he thought existed in the world. And he's about to experience a Christmas that will change not just his life, but the course of human history. Henry Webb has been in the trench for 6 days without relief. Not continuously in the front-line trench. They rotate back to support trenches, then reserve trenches, then occasionally to rest billets in ruined farmhouses behind the lines. But for these past 6 days, he's been in the firing line, and the cold has settled into his bones in a way he's beginning to think might be permanent. It's December 23rd, 1914. 4 months since Britain entered the war. 4 months since Henry walked into the recruiting office in Manchester with his friend Robert. Both of them caught up in the fever of it. The certainty that this would be an adventure, that they'd be home by Christmas. But now Robert is dead, killed by a sniper 3 weeks ago, while reaching for a tin of jam that had fallen just over the parapet. 3 weeks, and Henry can still see it, the way Robert's hand was still reaching even after. The trench is about 7 feet deep and perhaps 4 feet wide at the bottom, widening slightly at the top. The walls are reinforced with sandbags that are more mud than sand now, held together by frozen water and the roots of long-dead vegetation. Duckboards line the floor, keeping feet marginally above the water that seeps continuously from below and drains from above. But the duckboards are slick, treacherous, and occasionally they shift, and a man's boot plunges through into the icy water beneath. The smell is what Henry's mother would never understand if he tried to tell her. Not just mud and unwashed men, those she might imagine, but the particular combination of latrine buckets that can't be emptied often enough, of feet rotting inside boots that haven't been removed in days, of cordite and chloride of lime, of rats that grow fat on things Henry tries not to think about. And underneath it all, seeping from no man's land, the sweet, sick smell of bodies that have lain out there since the autumn offensives, too dangerous to retrieve. Henry shares this section of trench with about 30 other men from his company. Most are from Manchester and the surrounding towns, mill workers, clerks, shop assistants, men who 6 months ago had never held a rifle. Sergeant Morrison is a regular army man, had served in India before the war, and his steady competence is perhaps the only thing that's kept some of them sane. Lieutenant Ashford is 20, younger than Henry, fresh from officer training, trying desperately to appear confident while his hands shake during morning stand-to. The routine is unchanging. Stand-to at dawn, everyone on the fire step, rifles ready, because dawn is when attacks come. Then stand down, breakfast if there is any, usually bully beef and hard biscuits that need to be soaked in tea to be edible. Then the day's duties: repairing the trench, filling sandbags, cleaning rifles, writing letters that may or may not be sent, sleeping in snatches when exhaustion overwhelms the cold and discomfort. Stand to again at dusk. Then the night, which brings its own particular horrors. At night, no man's land comes alive with sounds. Working parties from both sides venture out to repair barbed wire, their movements creating whispers and clinks that could be anything. Occasionally, star shells burst overhead, flooding the landscape with harsh white light that throws everything into grotesque shadow. In those moments, everyone freezes. The working parties in no man's land, the sentries in the trenches, because movement means being seen, and being seen means being shot. The German trench is perhaps 200 yards away. On quiet days, if the wind is right, Henry can hear them talking, can smell their cooking. It seems absurd that men so close should be trying to kill each other. Sometimes he wonders what they're like, those voices in the German trench, whether they have friends who died reaching for jam tins, whether they have mothers who wouldn't understand the smell, whether they're as cold and tired and sick of this as he is. December 23rd passes like the days before it. A sniper kills Private Cooper during morning stand-to. A single shot, very precise, catching him just above the rim of his helmet as he peered through a gap in the sandbags. Cooper was 19, had a sweetheart back in the Salford, showed everyone her photograph so many times, the edges were worn soft. Sergeant Morrison organizes the grim business of wrapping the body, marking it for burial when there's time, writing the letter that will reach Salford in a week or two. That evening, someone starts singing. Private Davies, a Welshman with a voice that carries, begins Silent Night as the light fades. It's partly defiance. We're still here, still human, still remember that Christmas exists. Partly longing for homes and families and a world that seems impossibly distant. Others join in, their breath visible in the frozen air, the song rising above the trench and drifting across no man's land. And then, from the German trench, an answering song. Stille Nacht. The same hymn, different language, the melody unmistakable. For a moment, the two choruses overlap. British and German voices singing the same prayer for peace, for holy night, for a world that makes sense again. The singing fades. Someone makes a joke about the Germans having better harmony. Someone else wonders aloud if they'll get a parcel from home for Christmas. There are rumors of plum puddings and cigarettes being sent up from the rear. Lieutenant Ashford reminds them to clean their rifles. The moment passes, becomes just another odd thing in a war full of odd things. Henry wraps himself in his greatcoat and a blanket that's more holes than wool, wedges himself into a firing bay where the wind is slightly less brutal, and tries to sleep. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve. He wonders if there will be a ceasefire for Christmas Day, if the artillery will at least be silent for a few hours. It seems too much to hope for. Everything seems too much to hope for anymore. But exhaustion is stronger than cold, stronger than the sounds of the night, stronger than memory. Henry sleeps and dreams of Manchester, of gas lamps on wet streets, of his mother's kitchen with its coal fire and the smell of baking bread. Dreams of a world where wars are things you read about in history books, not things you live in trenches waiting to die. Tomorrow, everything will change, but tonight he's just another soldier trying to survive until morning. Christmas Eve dawns clear and bitterly cold. Henry wakes to frost coating everything, the sandbags, the duckboards, his own blanket. His breath makes clouds in the air. Someone has gotten a fire going in a brassiere, and men huddle around it, trying to warm hands that have gone numb overnight. The day passes quietly. No artillery, which is unusual enough to be remarked upon. A few rifle shots desultory, as if the snipers themselves aren't quite committed to the work today. Sergeant Morrison organizes the distribution of parcels that have arrived from England: tinned pudding, cigarettes, chocolate, knitted scarves, from women who've never met the men they're knitting for. Henry receives a package from his mother. Thick socks, a fruitcake wrapped in brown paper, a letter he reads 3 times, memorizing the news of home, the ordinary complaints about weather and neighbors that seem to come from another universe entirely. As afternoon fades toward evening, something changes in the atmosphere. It's subtle at first, a lack of tension, a sense that both sides have silently agreed that today the war can wait. Men move more freely, less fearful of showing their heads above the parapet. Someone suggests they might sing carols again tonight, properly, all together. Twilight comes early in December. By 4 o'clock, the light is fading, and by 5, darkness has settled over the trenches. And then, from the German lines, lights begin to appear. Not star shells or flares, but smaller lights, steady and warm. Candles, Henry realizes. The Germans have placed candles along their parapet, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, creating a string of gentle illumination that runs as far as he can see in either direction. "Would you look at that?" Private Davies says, his Welsh accent soft with wonder. "They've got Christmas trees." And they do. Small evergreen trees lifted above the trench, decorated with candles that flicker in the cold air. The sight is so unexpected, so ordinary and domestic and impossible in this place of death, that for a moment Henry can't quite process it. Christmas trees in the trenches. The Germans have somehow acquired Christmas trees and are displaying them like decorations in a town square. Then the singing begins. Not one or two voices, but many. The entire German line, it seems, raised in Stille Nacht. The melody drifts across no man's land, clear and pure in the frozen air. Henry feels something catch in his throat. It's the same song from yesterday, but tonight it's different. Tonight it's a tribute to their lives before the mud and the cold and the death of too many men to count. Without discussing it, without orders, the British soldiers respond. Silent night rises from their trench, voices rough and untrained but earnest. Two armies, two languages, one song. The harmonies interweave, and for 3 minutes and 40 seconds, there is no war. There is only music and cold, and the shared acknowledgement of something that matters more than the fighting. When the song ends, there's a moment of silence. Then, from the German trench, a voice calls out in English, "Happy Christmas, Tommy!" Someone in Henry's section, he thinks it's Davies, shouts back, "Happy Christmas, Fritz!" More voices back and forth, shouting greetings and well wishes, the kind of things you might call to neighbors across a street. Except the street is 200 yards of barbed wire and frozen mud, and the bodies of men who died trying to cross it. The absurdity of it strikes Henry with almost physical force. They're wishing each other happy Christmas while standing in trenches designed for killing each other. "We should meet," someone shouts from the German side. "In the middle, no shooting." There's a pause. This is different from singing, from shouted greetings. This is proposing something that could get men court-martialed or shot by their own side for fraternizing with the enemy. Henry looks at Sergeant Morrison, sees the older man's face caught between duty and something else. Longing, perhaps, or simple human curiosity. Lieutenant Ashford, looking terrified and very young, makes a decision. "No shooting," he calls across to the German trench. "We come out. You come out. No weapons. Just for tonight. Just for Christmas." "Agreed," comes the response. And so it begins. Men climb out of the trenches, slowly at first, cautious, half expecting bullets despite the agreement, but no shots come. The Germans are climbing out too, silhouetted against their candle-lit trees, moving forward into no man's land. Henry finds himself climbing the ladder, his heart pounding, every instinct screaming that going over the top means death. But he goes anyway, following Lieutenant Ashford, following Sergeant Morrison, following the illogical pull of this impossible moment. No man's land in daylight is a nightmare of shell holes and wire and mud and death. But tonight, under stars and a sliver of moon, it's simply ground. Frozen earth, difficult to walk on, but just ground. Henry picks his way forward, toward the dark shapes of men coming from the opposite direction. They meet in the middle, in the space between trenches. And for a heartbeat, no one knows quite what to do. Then a German soldier, young, no older than Henry, with a thin face and intelligent eyes, extends his hand. "Merry Christmas," he says in careful English. "I am Wilhelm." Henry shakes his hand. The glove is wool, German issue, not so different from his own. The hand inside is cold, just like his. "Henry," he says, "Merry Christmas." And with that, the dam breaks. Men are shaking hands, clapping shoulders, attempting conversations in broken English and broken German, an elaborate pantomime. Someone produces a bottle of schnapps. Someone else has rum. Cigarettes are exchanged, German tobacco for British, comparing, laughing at the differences. Photographs are shown: sweethearts, wives, children, parents. Family pictures, the universal currency of homesick soldiers. Wilhelm speaks better English than most of the Germans. He was a schoolteacher in Bavaria, he explains, taught English to children. He shows Henry a photograph of a young woman with serious eyes and a gentle smile. "My wife Anna," he says. "We married in June. I joined in August." He looks at the photograph with an expression Henry recognizes, longing mixed with fear, the constant worry about whether he'll ever see her again. Henry shows his own photograph, his mother and father outside their house in Manchester, taken last summer when the world still made sense. Wilhelm studies it gravely, comments on how proud Henry's mother looks. "Mothers," he says, and shakes his head with a smile that's both sad and fond. "They do not understand war. They understand only sons." Someone has found a mostly flat piece of ground between two shell craters, and a football appears. No one is quite sure from where. "Match," someone suggests. And suddenly there's enthusiastic organizing, men from both sides forming rough teams, arguing good-naturedly about positions and rules. Lieutenant Ashford ends up as referee, looking bewildered but game, his whistle, normally used for ordering men over the top to their deaths, now used for starting a football match in no man's land. The game is chaotic, muddy, and glorious. No one keeps score very carefully. The ball is barely inflated and tends to go flat after hard kicks. Players slip on the frozen ground, laugh, get up, then keep playing. Germans and British mixed together, divided not by nation but by the arbitrary assignment of teams. Henry finds himself defending alongside a German named Klaus, who's a butcher from Hamburg, and surprisingly nimble for a large man. When the ball goes into a particularly deep shell crater, they abandon the game and gather in loose groups, talking, sharing the schnapps and rum that's making the rounds. Someone starts singing again, not carols this time, but folk songs. The Germans sing a drinking song about a tavern by the Rhine. The British respond with, "It's a long way to Tipperary," and the Germans join in on the chorus, mangling the words but capturing the spirit. Henry sits on the frozen ground next to Wilhelm, passing the schnapps bottle back and forth, and asks the question that's been growing in his mind all evening. What are we doing here? Why are we fighting? Wilhelm is quiet for a long moment. "I do not know," he says finally. "I know what they tell us about honor, about defending the fatherland, about Kaiser and country. But sitting here, talking to you, looking at your mother's photograph." He shakes his head. "I do not know. You seem like my students, like my neighbors, not like an enemy." "You seem like the men I worked with at the insurance office," Henry says. "Like my friends. Like people I'd know from church or the pub." He takes another drink, the schnapps burning pleasantly in the cold. "My friend Robert died 3 weeks ago, sniper shot. And I've been so angry thinking about the German who killed him. But now I'm wondering, was it you? Was it Klaus or Johann or any of these men I'm sitting with? And if it was, how do I be angry at someone who's showing me pictures of his wife and singing Christmas carols?" "Perhaps we are all someone's Robert," Wilhelm says quietly. "Perhaps every man we kill is someone's friend, someone's son, someone who would show us photographs of his family if we met him on a night like this." The cold is intense now, well past midnight. Men begin drifting back toward their respective trenches, shaking hands again, wishing each other safe nights, promising to avoid shooting tomorrow at least tomorrow, at least for Christmas. Henry and Wilhelm shake hands one final time. Stay safe, Henry from Manchester, Wilhelm says. You too, Wilhelm from Bavaria, Henry responds. Maybe we'll meet again. After, when this is over. Wilhelm smiles, sad and genuine. I would like that. I would like to meet you in a world where we are not trying to kill each other. Henry climbs back into his trench as the sky begins to lighten toward dawn. Around him, other men are returning, moving quietly, lost in their own thoughts. No one speaks much. What is there to say? They've just spent the night drinking and singing and playing football with men they're supposed to kill, men who are supposed to kill them, men who are, it turns out, just men. Henry lies down in his bay, still wearing his frozen coat, too tired and too drunk and too overwhelmed to bother with the blanket. He thinks about Wilhelm's wife Anna, about his own mother, about Robert reaching for a tin of jam, about Cooper with his worn photograph, about the German candles flickering on Christmas trees in a trench, about the fact that the war is supposed to resume tomorrow or the next day, and he's supposed to shoot at men he sang carols with. Henry falls asleep just as dawn breaks on Christmas Day and dreams of a world where this night never has to end. Christmas Day passes in a strange, dreamlike quiet. No artillery, no sniping. Men from both sides venture into no man's land again, this time in daylight. And the scene is almost surreal in its ordinariness. They help each other bury the dead who've been lying out there for weeks. British burying Germans, Germans burying British, the work done with respect and shared shovels. Someone has brought out a camera and takes photographs that will, in this timeline, eventually appear in newspapers around the world. Henry spends part of the afternoon sitting on the German parapet with Wilhelm, sharing tinned beef, and talking about their lives before the war. Wilhelm describes his classroom, the students who struggled with English irregular verbs, the satisfaction of watching a child's face light up when something suddenly makes sense. Henry talks about the insurance office, the tedium of filing and calculations, how he'd sometimes stare out the window at the Manchester rain and wonder if there was supposed to be more to life than this. They laugh at the irony. Henry had wanted adventure, something more than an office. Now he'd give anything to have that boredom back. As evening approaches, the mood begins to shift. Men on both sides know that Christmas can't last forever. Officers have been conspicuously absent from no man's land, though they've turned a blind eye to the fraternization. Word has started to filter down from headquarters. The high command is not pleased. Orders will be coming. Tomorrow or the next day, the war must resume. Boxing Day morning, December 26th. Henry wakes to Sergeant Morrison standing in the trench, his face grave. Lieutenant Ashford is beside him, looking sick. The order has come down. The ceasefire ends at noon. At noon, artillery will resume. By evening, they're to have conducted a raid on the German trench. A raid, Private Davies says, his voice flat. On men we were playing football with 2 days ago. On men who helped us bury our dead. Those are the orders, Sergeant Morrison says, but there's something in his voice. Doubt, perhaps, or disgust, or simple weariness. He's a career soldier, has followed orders his entire adult life. But even he seems to be struggling with this one. Lieutenant Ashford looks like he might be sick. He starts to say something, then stops, unable to find words that make this make sense. We have our duty, he concedes. To what? Henry hears himself saying. He's surprised by his own voice, by the anger in it. Our duty to what? To kill Wilhelm, who showed me pictures of his wife? To kill Klaus, who taught me German curse words while we played football? What exactly is that duty supposed to be? Henry, Lieutenant Ashford begins. No, Henry says. And he's standing now, other men turning to look at him. No, I don't think I will. I don't think I can. Not after this. Not after seeing that they're just like us. Not after realizing that this entire war is just men like us, killing men like them because someone somewhere drew lines on a map and decided we should hate each other. There's a long silence. Then Private Davies speaks. I won't either. I won't shoot at men I sang carols with. Neither will I, says another voice. Private Jenkins, a quiet man from Liverpool who rarely speaks. This is mutiny, Lieutenant Ashford says, but his voice lacks conviction. He looks terrified, caught between orders from above and the reality of the men standing in front of him. Sergeant Morrison removes his helmet, runs a hand through his gray hair. For a long moment, he says nothing. Then, I've been a soldier for 20 years. Served in India, South Africa, Egypt. Always followed orders. Always did my duty. He looks at Lieutenant Ashford, then at the men. But I think Private Webb is right. I think this war is madness. I think we've all seen something these past 2 days that we can't unsee. And I don't know if I can go back to killing men who buried our dead beside their own. The generals, Ashford starts. The generals aren't here, Morrison says quietly. The generals didn't play football in no man's land. The generals didn't see what we saw. We did. We're the ones who have to decide if we can live with following these orders. From the German trench, a voice calls across no man's land. Tommy, we have orders to shoot. There's anguish in the voice. At noon, we are told to shoot. Henry climbs up on the fire step, shows himself above the parapet. An action that would have meant certain death a week ago. We have orders too, he shouts back. We're refusing them. We won't shoot. There's a pause, then. We also refuse. We will not shoot at friends. And in that moment, everything changes. Word spreads along the trenches in both directions, carried by men climbing out to spread the news to adjacent sections. British soldiers talking to British soldiers, German soldiers talking to German soldiers. What if we all just stopped? What if we all refused? Noon comes. No artillery fires. Officers in the rear, generals in their chateau, wait for reports of resumed hostilities. The reports don't come. Instead, what comes is something unprecedented, something none of them planned for. Silence. The guns stay silent. The rifles stay silent. Men stay in their trenches, but they're not fighting. They're simply refusing to fight. By evening, the refusal has spread for miles in both directions. Not everywhere. Some sections resume fighting. Some officers manage to enforce discipline. Some men follow orders out of fear or habit or genuine belief in the cause. But in enough places, among enough men, the refusal holds. The machinery of war requires the cooperation of the soldiers doing the fighting. And if those soldiers say no, the machinery stops. Over the next week, the refusal spreads further. More sections of the front fall quiet. Men on both sides begin venturing into no man's land again, not to attack but to talk, to share food, to play football, to simply exist as human beings rather than as soldiers. Officers who try to stop it find themselves facing men who have discovered something more powerful than orders: solidarity. The recognition that the men on the other side want the same things they want: to go home, to survive, to end this madness. High command on both sides is in chaos. Court-martials are threatened, but you can't court-martial thousands of men simultaneously. Executions are threatened, but shooting your own soldiers en masse would destroy what's left of army cohesion. Some sections are pulled back and replaced with fresh troops who haven't experienced the Christmas Truce, who haven't met the enemy as human beings. But even among the replacements, word spreads. The soldiers on both sides have discovered they have more in common with each other than with the generals sending them to die. By February, the Western Front has effectively collapsed, not through military defeat, but through exhaustion and refusal. The machinery of war, deprived of the willing cooperation of those doing the actual fighting, grinds to a halt. Politicians scramble to negotiate peace, desperate to end the war on terms that don't look like surrender, but increasingly aware that continuing is impossible when the soldiers themselves won't cooperate. Henry sits in a trench in March 1915, writing a letter to his mother. "We're going home soon," he writes. "The war is ending, not because anyone won, but because we all decided to stop losing. We put down our weapons and chose not to fight. I don't know if this makes us heroes or cowards. I only know that I met a German named Wilhelm, who has a wife who loves his mother the way I love you. And I no longer saw the enemy, but rather I saw myself. And so did thousands of other men who also chose not to fight. And that defiance has ended this war. I'm coming home, Mother, not wounded, not in a box, but alive and well, unwounded and whole. You will see me again soon." In our timeline, the Christmas Truce of 1914 ended. Officers enforced discipline, rotated units, and the war resumed. It continued for 4 more years, consuming millions of lives, devastating Europe, creating wounds that never fully healed, and setting the stage for an even more terrible conflict 2 decades later. The men who participated in the truce carried the memory of it for the rest of their lives. That strange, impossible night when enemies became human beings. But in the timeline I've just shown you, that night didn't end. The humanity that surfaced on Christmas Eve couldn't be forced back down. The soldiers who met in no man's land, who played football and shared photographs and recognized each other as men rather than monsters, they couldn't go back to killing. The war ended not with defeat, but with the triumph of refusal. Peace negotiations concluded by summer of 1915. The terms were messy, satisfying no one completely, but infinitely better than 4 more years of slaughter. The generation that would have been lost to the trenches thrived instead, had children, built businesses, wrote books, taught school, lived ordinary lives that in our timeline were cut short in mud and blood. And without the devastation and humiliation of prolonged war, without the punitive peace that bred resentment, without the economic collapse that followed, the conditions that created the Second World War never developed. That timeline still has conflicts, still has injustices, still has suffering. Human nature doesn't change simply because one war ends differently. But it doesn't have the Holocaust. It doesn't have the atomic bomb. It doesn't have 50 million dead in a second global conflict. The trajectory of the entire 20th century shifts because soldiers in muddy trenches chose humanity over orders. Henry Webb goes home to Manchester in 1915 and returns to his office job, eventually marries. He names his son Robert after the friend he lost. He stays in touch with Wilhelm through letters. They even meet once in the 1920s when Wilhelm brings his family to England. For an afternoon of reunion and bittersweet reflection, their children laughed and played together, unaware of the war their fathers denied and the events that forged a friendship. Henry lives until 1968, long enough to see a world that, while imperfect, never experienced the particular horrors that defined our 20th century. As I return this volume to my collection, I find myself thinking about my colleagues in this library. The historian preserves the memory of patient hands creating beautiful things, the clockmakers measuring time, the men whose skill shaped the world. He would appreciate, I think, the craftsmanship of peacemaking, the patient work of men like Henry, choosing not to destroy. And the myth-keeper with her stories of resistance and survival, the trickster tales and the songs that couldn't be silenced. She would recognize something in this story. The soldiers refusing orders as its own form of resistance, the oral tradition of the Christmas Truce spreading along the trenches, carried voice to voice, man to man, until it became something the generals couldn't suppress. In our timeline, we honor veterans by remembering their sacrifice, their courage, their willingness to serve. We celebrate their immense bravery and honor to duty with medals, flags, and parades. But the Christmas Truce revealed an even deeper layer worthy of honor: those soldiers' ability to set duty aside, if only for a day, and embrace the humanity connecting both sides of the battlefield. The timeline I've shown you tonight is one where soldiers chose unity over war. They chose to see Wilhelm from Bavaria and Henry from Manchester as men who loved their families, not as enemies to be destroyed. They chose to refuse orders that served no purpose beyond sending young men home in wooden boxes. And that choice, that simple, dangerous choice, changed everything. We can't know if such a choice was even possible in our timeline. Perhaps the forces driving that war were too strong, the momentum too great, the systems too rigid to allow for spontaneous peace. Or perhaps it simply needed one more section of the front to refuse, one more officer to turn a blind eye, one more soldier like Henry to stand up and say, "No, I won't kill my friend." But the fact that in some alternate flow of events, it could have happened, that's worth contemplating, because it reminds us that wars aren't forces of nature, they're human creations, sustained by human choices. And what humans create, humans can choose to end. Thank you for walking this path with me tonight, for witnessing this alternate history, where Christmas 1914 became more than a brief moment of humanity in the midst of horror. If this journey has moved you, if it's made you think about courage and choice, and the ways ordinary people shape history, I hope you'll return next week. I'll be here opening another volume from my collection, tracing another path that time didn't take. Until then, rest well, fellow traveler. And remember that every day we choose humanity over hatred, peace over violence, understanding over fear. We're building a better history for ourselves and the generations to come, one small choice at a time. The library waits, always, for those who seek the paths not taken and the worlds that might have been. Good night.